As the CEO of Chicago Cares, Rosie Drumgoole directs a 15-member team and $3 million budget toward optimizing volunteerism in the Windy City. Today, she talks about helping neighbors in the era of ICE raids, leveraging community as an antidote to division, and how flexible nomenclature might just preserve the essence of DEI. Welcome to the Science of Good, where we sit down with cause leaders who are disrupting the status quo, tackling our toughest societal problems, and seeking better ways to spark change. Rosie, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
So, Rosie, let's give the audience an overview about your organization, Chicago Cares, and their community impact model.
Yeah. So our mission is to mobilize volunteers to build a stronger and more unified Chicago. We do that by working deeply with community leaders and community-based organizations to figure out, how we can leverage our resources, whether it's volunteers, whether it's relationships, whatever the case may be. How can we leverage our relationships to move their work forward faster? I think one of the things that I've personally learned working in this sector is that, folks know the answer, right? Like they know what they need. It's not for us to, helicopter in and, decide what needs to happen. It's more so for us to act in solidarity with our neighbors and to say, hey, you know what you need, tell me what you need, and let's work together to go get it. And that's what Chicago Cares does. That's what we're about, is acting in solidarity with our community, but also connecting people to community and to different causes, and hopes that that inspires them to want to do more, to want to give more, to want to lead, to want to show up differently for communities.
I love that. One of our mission, our heart of the Science of Good video series, this podcast, is really to have other nonprofit leaders hear from each other to see what's working, what's not working, and how you are navigating that. And because you all have so much in common, you're doing good work, but sometimes the work is really hard, especially now. This is not an easy time for nonprofits. There are a lot of things that are going on. And like I said before, I spotted you in the Chronicle of Philanthropy. The DEI dilemma was actually the article, Doubling Down or Backing Down. So tell us a little bit about that interview and the process, how you were able to share your insight as it pertains to DEI.
Yeah, so it was really interesting. I actually sat on a panel at the beginning of the year or a few months ago. I don't know, time is a fallacy. This year has been wild, y'all. I'm not gonna lie to you. So at some point before now, I was on a panel, and one of the moderator of the panel had connections or worked for the Chronicle of Philanthropy, and one of the things that we talked about on that panel was sort of how people were navigating with DEI stuff and the federal government. And so Chicago Cares, to be clear, is 100% privately funded. We do not get any money from the government. However, again, we work in partnership with community-based organizations that do receive government funding. And also we work with corporate entities, right? Like about half of our funding comes from corporate, right? Like we have, businesses who come to us and say that, hey, we want to get involved in community. We want our employees to get involved in community. We make investments in these ways, and we want our employees to put their hands on it in a really tangible way. And so we at Chicago Cares will work with those companies to design a volunteer experience for them that is rooted in their values, their beliefs, and their investments, and give their employees an opportunity to really see in a tangible sense what the company believes in and what they're investing in. And so because of that, though, a lot of the companies we work with do have ties to the federal government, right? Like they have contracts, they have, just different ways that they're tied up and are impacted by federal policy. And so, it's when I think about our community and I think about our stakeholder groups, right? Like one of the things I said was like, I've got a really good board, and I've got folks on my board who have corporate backgrounds, and they were shook at the beginning of the year. And they were like, and I've got these real, I got guys who are not flappable. They are not easily flapped. And they came to me and they were flapped. And And when the unflappable becomes flappable, you have to stand up and be like, oh, let me pay attention. And so part of the conversation we had at the board level was like, hey, look, it's not that the mission has changed. It's not that we don't still believe in equity and solidarity and in community investment. Work has not changed. But the thing that I said on that panel was like, I said it in the article, right? Like, if that means I got to change some words on my website to make some people feel more comfortable about being in partnership with us, I'm going to do it, because the work hasn't changed. It's just the way that we talk about it is changing. And that's all that is. And so that's kind of how, you know, I said some wild stuff on a panel, and then I said some wild stuff in an article, and that's how we got here.
Well, I think when you talk about when the unflappable become flappable, and we all felt that at the beginning of the year, and it seems like it's intensified, right? At least from my chair. I see you nodding, so you must feel similarly. What have you seen change as we've traveled through this year? As far as, are people more concerned than they were in the summer? Are things moderating, or are things just continuing to be intense in an environment where people are extremely cautious, if not scared, about how they do or who they associate with might reflect on them?
That's a really good question. I think that we are still living in a time of shock and awe, right? Like, I think every day, like I'm in Chicago, obviously Chicago cares. And so I think, you know, if you read the news, or, you know, you get on a good TikTok, you know, the hole or whatever, you know that we are, it feels like the city is under siege. We are under siege, right? Like, folks are being taken away from their families. They are, you know, sometimes in very dramatic fashion. Neighborhoods are being tear gassed. You know, school children are getting tear gassed. You know, it's really, I smile because it seems so ridiculous, but it's actually what's happening. It's real life. And it's really scary. And so I don't think that necessarily it's moderated. I think it's only gotten worse. But I think that, you know, Chicago is for now, a unique experience. And it sort of feels like, the pandemic all over again. I'll be real honest with you. Like, you go down some of our corridors, you know, there's a neighborhood in Chicago, Little Village. It's a predominantly Mexican neighborhood, but it is the second biggest economic corridor in the city of Chicago. And you go down 26th Street and it's empty. It's not the same hustle and bustle. And so you think about just the city's economic impact. That's a huge impact, because those neighbors are scared to come outside. I mean, we've heard stories, I've seen pictures and videos of people who are selling, you know, tamales in their carts, who've been doing so for years and years, and they're getting snatched up and disappeared, and we don't know where they are, and nobody's answering any questions. And so it's just different, right? Like, I think at the beginning of the year, we were having this conversation about, you know, DEI, and, you know, to some extent, to me right now, that feels like that was almost like a luxurious conversation to be having. And right now it's more so a conversation about, like, how are people eating today without their SNAP benefits? And how are people, you know, getting their kids to school and getting home at the end of the day? How are people able to get to work and make sure that they get back home? I was just reading an article about, like, you know, folks are asking the mayor and the governor to put a moratorium on evictions because people aren't going to work, because they're scared of going to work, because they're scared they're not going to go home from work. And so it's just it's just a different form of shock and awe. But it feels like that's been all of 2025, is like here, I'm going to take your federal funding from you, and now I'm going to take your families from you, and now I'm taking your food from you, and now I'm going to be taking this from you and that from you. And I will say, though, like, while it feels really heavy and deep, the one thing that I can say that I'm really, really proud of is that I've seen neighbors come together and try to figure out and plan for one another. Like, what are the things that neighbors can do? Can I go buy your groceries? Can I take your kid to school? Chicago Cares, we sent out 500,000 text messages to Chicagoans to let them know what their rights are. Just so you know, you don't have to open the door for somebody who doesn't have a warrant, right? And it's got to be signed by a judge, right? And so this is what you look for. And so we did a whole all-out information campaign. Folks are doing, information packs and all kinds of different things. So it's like, even though it feels real heavy right now, I am encouraged because I see my city come together and connect with each other and figure out how to put in gaps that, that didn't previously exist last year.
So that is reminiscent of the pandemic in that very dark, heavy times, but people did come together and they were supportive of one another. Even when they couldn't physically be together, they could be supportive. What's interesting to me about this moment, from a behavioral science point of view, is that so much of what you or other nonprofit leaders do is about establishing social norms. So previously, those social norms could have been large corporations have skills-based volunteering that they put in place, and that is a norm for a responsible corporation. Or in recruiting volunteers, it's like, you know what, people like me sign up and volunteer. So trying to make it a social norm. It's so difficult now because all of the social norms are changing. They're in total flux. So people don't have anywhere to land. As far as from a communications point of view, you mentioned sending out email and information packets. That's a change. Have there been other changes in terms of your recruiting practices, volunteer opportunities? How have your comms adjusted to this? I wouldn't call it a new normal. An ongoing chaos is probably a better description.
Yeah, ongoing chaos. You know what? We have a platform where we can send text messages out to people, and I think that has been working really well. Just kind of like leaning into this point in time. We all have, I know my little device is not very far from me. I'm sure yours is also right where mine is, very close to you, right? And so being able to send out text messages to folks has been a really powerful way of communication. And I think the messaging that we're actually saying, we actually sent a message out to our stakeholders that was like, hey, we know times are tough right now, and that we are in deep communication with our community partners. So just like, it's kind of been a little bit more transparent, I guess I would say, of like, hey guys, like, just know that we are in communication with our partners and we are posting programming that folks say that they need, right? My team has been in a whole bunch of different community meetings the last couple of weeks to figure out like, what are programs that what are things that we can do right now for folks, whether it's informational, whether it's beefing up our support of food pantries, right? Because our food pantry partners are really getting hit. And so, we had another partner reach out, and we've had a couple different other community-based organization leaders like say, hey, like, we need to protect our staff. How are you guys like kind of working with your staff, when folks are afraid of ICE raids, or like, how do we protect our business? What does that look like? So even just like sharing information about what you can do to, protect your business. What are things that you can do to protect your staff? What are things you can do to protect your clients, whatever they may be? And so just like being very transparent and sharing resources with folks is one way that our comms has changed. I mean, obviously like we're Chicago Cares. And one of the things that like, I've really pushed with my staff and my board is like, we are gonna, because that's just who I am. We're gonna remain joyful. We're gonna have a good time because joy is radical. Happiness is radical. This is also a time where I think one of the things with shock and awe is that people want you to feel not hopeful, right? People want you to feel disenfranchised. People want you to like just be so sad and stuck that you don't move forward. And we're not going to do that around here. We're going to sing, we're going to dance, we're going to laugh, we're going to be joyful, we're going to have a good kiki, and we're going to get stuff done. and we're going to advocate and we're going to stand in solidarity. Those two things can happen at the same time. And so I think, if you go on our Instagram, you'll still see we have all the cute little graphics and people high-fiving and giving hugs because, volunteerism should be feel good. But also we're sharing information. We're being transparent. We're saying, hey, we're in communication with our community partners. Stay tuned because we're going to be posting stuff that's like, really rapid. Again, this is kind of back to that COVID era, playbook of like, how are we rapidly responding to needs? How are we getting in motion quicker? How are we, getting our volunteers involved and making them know, like, if you feel stuck, come to us and we hopefully can get you something that gets you unstuck. So I think it's definitely the text messages, the transparent communication, and still remaining joyful and hopeful in our communications is really important right now.
Rosie, you touched a little bit about this just now about keeping the joy. And I remember in our pre-conversation, I really got that from you because as a person who's watching it on the news, reading it in the Chronicle of Philanthropy and listening to your story, even what you're saying right now, this can be very heavy and it can feel very just like almost hopeless. And so I would love to know if we can just dig a little bit deeper on how do you keep the purpose driven, the mission driven action from not being underwhelmed or undershadowed or even derailed by polarization fatigue?
Yeah, I have so I sit on a board with, he's the CEO of an organization called Latinos Progresando. His name is Luis Gutierrez. And his organization is really on the forefront of a lot of this stuff going on with ICE and these raids. And, his building actually had some like really nasty anti-Semitic graffiti put on the building that they have. And every time I see Luis, he cracks a joke. He gives me a hug. He's deep in it and yet still finds a way to smile and give hugs and be inspiring and inspirational, right? Like he's just a really good dude. And him and I'm sure there's lots of other leaders, but like, a lot of it is like, I look to him like, man, if he can smile and give people hugs and still be very like, still a strong and fierce advocate for the work, right? Then I can too, right? Like, yeah. I absolutely can too. And so I think that's the way that, especially I think when you lead a nonprofit, right? Leadership can be lonely. It can very much be lonely, right? I feel a lot on my shoulders, and I know every other nonprofit executive or social impact sector leader feels the same way. And so it's good to know that like you have a community that you can lean on, who we can just like, what, I can see you smile, I'm gonna smile too. This is what you need right now. This is what we need right now. And I think, when I think about our work, right, coming back to Chicago Cares, the work that we do is about building bridges. It's about weaving people together. It's about having those conversations and shifting those narratives, right? Like, I want people to come and serve at a food pantry, meet somebody who's at the food pantry and see like, oh, dang, they look like me. It doesn't look like maybe what you thought a person at a food pantry would look like or a homeless shelter would look like, right? Like, I've heard that story a bunch of like, oh, I went to go serve at this place and I thought, I've had that experience where I've gone to a shelter and I saw somebody and she was jazzy fly. Do you hear me? Homegirl looked good. And I was like, oh, she must be like, a case manager or something. Come to find out she was a resident. And I'm like, oh, dang, right? Like, because you just have these preconceived notions about what folks look like or how they talk or how they show up. And then you go and you serve and you have an experience and you're like, oh man, like, this is totally different. And now, I have a connection with somebody who is in a shelter, who's in a food pantry. And like, then you start to reshape what a narrative looks like. And that, again, just is breaking down these barriers and showing people that we are closer and we are in community with each other more so than we think we are. And so I think that also is just a beautiful way of, when I think about community, right? And just how important volunteerism is to community, and you have those interactions, and it's really hard to then sit and say like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be so downtrodden. And it's like, no, that's not actually what's going to get us out of this, right? Like, you feeling overwhelmed and stuck and sad and in your room with the blanket over your head crying is not going to be what gets us out of this. It's going to be the folks who say, you know what, this is hard, but we can do hard things, and we're going to get in community, and community is fun. Being in community with your brothers and sisters is fun. It's fun. We kiki, we laugh, we hug, we cry together. It's hard, but you know what, we get through it. And that's how we're going to get through this. It's not going to be with sadness and heaviness and, you know, rainy clouds over our heads, right? Like, it's real easy to do that, but that's not what's going to happen. We're going to get through this with sunshine. We're going to get through this with laughter. We're going to play some music. We're going to pack some food, and we're going to get the stuff done.
Some of what you're talking about, I think about is descriptive norms, where you start to show and speak in terms of your neighbors, or joining thousands who are volunteering, putting those descriptive norms out there that give note to the scale of the good being done, is a remarkable counterbalance to all of the negativity. So perhaps that can find its way into some of those text messages or some of the kits that you're building, because a whole big part of it is just not being alone. You talk about building community. I mean, that's what it's all about. The quickest way to feel better about yourself is to help someone else.
Yes, 100%.
Exactly. So what are some of the other things that you're seeing right now, and maybe some other concerns that you have for the near future?
I think we are, and this goes a little bit to your previous question, Rashonda. I think we are super disconnected. I think we're super polarized. And, you know, the conspiracy theorist in me is like, that's a little by design, right? But the problem is when we're only talking to each other, when we're only talking to our echo chambers, right? Bad things happen, frankly. I think a lot about, and I can't remember if you and I were having this conversation, but I think a lot about when folks lack community, when they lack relationships, specifically physical in-person relationships. And I think the pandemic took a lot of that from folks. And it's been a real challenge to build that back. But like that physical in-person community, right? When we lack that, we see like then folks become more susceptible to being radicalized, right? To be quite frank, because when your only community is the online community, wild stuff happens online, and it's easier for you to become radicalized or to like, you know, you're in an echo chamber. So you're just hearing the same thing over and over again, and spins up until it comes to a head. Whereas when you have a physical in-person community, right? Like you volunteer at the senior center doing arts and crafts every other Tuesday, right? And I see you every other Tuesday. And if there's a Tuesday where I don't see you and you ain't told me why I don't see you, I'm emailing you like, bro, where you at? Right. And it's a small thing and it seems silly, but it's a form of community. It is community. It is community amongst my volunteers. And so I think a lot, and I worry a lot with like this, you know, I think volunteerism is making a comeback, but I don't know if it's coming back as quickly as it needs to, because I know that volunteerism, I know that having regular programming is a form of physical community for folks. And we are lacking that physical community space, that third space. And so that's kind of what keeps me up at night too, is like, if folks are not coming to volunteer, and it doesn't have to be with Chicago Cares, obviously, I hope it is, but it doesn't have to be. But like, if folks aren't coming back to their physical third spaces, in the way that I need them to, like what's happening? Where are these people? We're losing them. They're not going to work, right? Like lots of people have been laid off, right? So if they're not going to work and they're not, you know, going to, you know, their place of worship, and they're not going to the YMCA or the gym, right? Like, and they're not coming to volunteer. Where are these people? They are missing. And so I think a lot about like, how are we rebuilding this physical social connection piece? And also how are we pulling these people back into this, and where are they, and what are they doing, and who are they talking to? And that just like, that all just like keeps me up at night of like, I just want there to be a strong social connection, social fabric. I think volunteerism, as cheesy as it sounds, I do think volunteerism, civic engagement in community is the answer. I think we all have the answer in us. I think we're the answer.
Well, Kevin said it best at the beginning. The best way that you can get out of your own funk, or the best way that you could process what is going on with you, is to be a giver, is to serve your way out of it. And
Mhm.
I think you are definitely giving us proof of that in the work that you do at Chicago Cares.
And you're
Yay.
also your comment about being a nonprofit leader is can be lonely. That's why we started this podcast.
Hmm.
Was for nonprofit leaders to hear from other nonprofit leaders and go, hey, you know what? We have the same problems. And it really surprises me, regardless of the sector, whether it's a little nonprofit or a really mature large one, the problems are remarkably similar, and so are the solutions. So,
Hmm.
but thank you for sharing that with us today. Rashonda, do you remember our last guest question
I do. I
for
do
Rosie?
remember our last. Yes. So we always ask our previous guests to give you a question. And so one of the things they wanted to know is, what gives you hope that people still want to do good together?
Oh, what gives me hope? Um, I mean, I see it. I think I so here's the thing. I'm a what do you call it? A kinesthetic learner. Like I
Hmm.
have to experience it to get it, right? Like I'm not really good. Like please don't send me an instruction manual because first of all, I'm not gonna read it all and it's not gonna all get in my brain. Like I need to do it. Like I'm the person you gotta send the math problems to. I actually have to do the math problems to get the math.
Hmm.
Um, and so actually seeing it is the way that I know, right? Like I have physically seen the mutual aid networks get set up. I have seen the social media posts of people resharing like how to get, food access during a time when you don't have your SNAP benefits. Like I have seen people send out the text messages. Like I feel like I kind of have the cheat code because of where I work and I actually get to see people like, I've got about 10 projects between now and the end of the year that are companies just buying gifts for different community partners and are having gift wrap projects in their offices,
Awesome.
right? So like I see it. That is how I know. That is how I keep my hope, is that people are doing it. So I don't even have to really have the faith of a mustard seed, really. It gets right in front of me and I don't see it stopping anytime soon.
That's powerful. So what would
Mhm.
be your question for the next guest?
How are you taking care of yourself? That's the question I ask every time I see a leader in the space, especially now. We're notorious for not using our PTO. We're notorious for not taking our annual raises. We're notorious for working through our PTO and not going on vacation when we know we need to. And I've heard too many stories of other EDs and CEOs like having medical conditions because they didn't stop to go to the doctor's office to take care of themselves. So my question is, how are you taking care of yourself?
Mm, that's a very good question, Rosie.
Mhm. Yep.
What
Very
a
good
great way to
question.
end it.
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. Rosie, thank you so much for sharing your insight. And I just want to say thank you for continuing to do good work at Chicago Cares. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
The Science of Good interviews support the work of For Goodness Sakes, a communications firm that uses behavioral change principles to help nonprofits and government agencies advance social causes. Learn more at fgsakes.com.